What's up guys, and welcome to the very first session. This is the start of a series to where I'm going to be showing you how I write my songs from beginning to end, including the gear I use, the programs I use, the VSTs and plugins that I use, and how I go about using each and every one of them. So for anybody out there who has ever been a fan of any music that I've ever done, this is the place where you learn how I do it. Now, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Thornton, and I spent the last decade of my life touring the world in a band called Woe Is Me. A lot of that, which was spent in the studio, I took every opportunity I could to learn everything I could from a great person and a good friend of mine, Cameron Mizell, down at Chango Studios. For those of you who don't know Chango, he's produced bands such as Memphis Mayfire, Sleeping with Sirens, Woe Is Me, and even older bands like Oceana or Of Machines. Every week, I'm gonna release a new track on my Instagram because that's where you will hear it first. Each track will be different from the last, but in some way, shape, or form, be showing you something new about how I write music. Now, the other day, I released a 1 minute long track on my Instagram, and that track is what we're going to be going over today. But first, we gotta break it down to the basics. Let's start with my gear. First and most importantly is my Line 6 UX2. This little guy single-handedly is one of the most important things in my setup. I use the UX2 for anything when it comes to guitars, bass, keyboards, or vocals. Hey, you know what they say, it's not just about the size, it's about how you use it. Now, there are multiple interfaces out there. This one was just the most readily available and came in at a pretty low price. This thing has been with me through just about every tour imaginable and somehow hasn't shit the bed. Next up is my Schecter Hellraiser. Although the name is kind of terribly covered up by this GoPro mount, this thing is by far one of my favorite guitars. One of the things I like most about this guitar is that it comes with a nice set of EMG pickups. On top of that, I'm able to fit some pretty fat strings into the 7th place. With that being said, just because you have the most expensive guitar doesn't always mean you're gonna get the best sound. Sure, having a nice guitar does make a difference, but it's not always the main deciding factor in the sound you're gonna get out of it. Next up is gonna be my M-Audio Oxygen 49 MIDI controller. When it comes to MIDI controllers, don't be fooled by all the bells and whistles that some of them offer, because in the end, the majority of them all do the same thing. And what it really comes down to is the plugins and VSTs that you use on your recording software that's gonna give you the sounds you're looking for. If workspace is a concern, then that's when I have a small other MIDI controller to take with me on the go. This little guy does all the same things that the other ones do, but just in a smaller, more compact form. All right, and that's it. That's really all the gear that I use when recording the music that you see online. With that being said, let's head over to the computer and see exactly how I use them. Now that you've made it this far, let's dive into the rig and see what programs, plugins, and VSTs I use to make this music happen. All right, guys, this right here is Ableton Live. This is the program that I use to record just about anything I could come up with musically. Now, before Ableton, I used to swear by Pro Tools, but when I was touring, I needed something a little bit more compact and user-friendly, and that's where Ableton came into play. With that being said, it doesn't matter what audio program you really want to use. All that matters is that you use whatever best suits you for the style of music that you're trying to record. So, with that out of the way, let's start with the guitars. For all my guitar work, I use a VST called Bias Amp. This thing has been a legitimate lifesaver. Whether it be delayed, distorted, or clean guitar, this VST pretty much offers everything you can need to make whatever sound you're going for. One of the coolest things about this VST is that it has the option for you to go online and be able to download pre-made patches to kind of give yourself a little bit of a foundation for building your own unique sound off of. In my case, I use some of the patches by a guy named Ryan Bruce. If you scroll all the way to the bottom, the plugin that I used was the Fluff AM Mark V RTM. Now, after downloading his presets, these are the settings that I have for each of the tabs that are available. You have your custom panels, your preamps, the EQ, the tone stack, the power amp, transformer, the cab, the final EQ, and then your amp match, which is for a whole nother application. Now, with all those guitar settings dialed in, let's jump back to the recording software. Now, one of the things I like to do is go in with my own EQ to really adjust the tone of the guitar how I personally like it to be. Now, as you're gonna hear, this is a clip with no EQ. Now, this is that same clip, but with EQ. Now, what you do with any equalization is 100% up to your own personal liking. With any guitar recording, you're going to want to have a designated left track and a designated right track, meaning that you're going to have to play through the same thing twice. That's the only way you're going to get that full, warm stereo sound. But with that being said, let's take a little bit of a sidestep to look at some of the glitches that I put into my regular guitar tracks to give them a little bit of variety. For example, right here at the beginning, you'll see that I added in a little bit of a glitch step on the second out of the fourth measure. Now, all I did to make that happen was I went into the guitar track, cut off a little piece of the sound, and put it into the track at 30-second increments. I know it may seem like a lot of work for something so small, but those little things can make the biggest difference in how your sound comes out. One of the other things I like to do is to go through and pan my guitar tracks from left to right channels when I'm trying to get in a small transition without making too big of a scene. If you take it back to what I mentioned about glitch steps, as you can see, I added in a little bit of those at the end of this to combine both of the panning and the glitches into one transition. As you can see throughout the song, I use the panning and glitch steps together quite often. One of the other things I like to do is pan the first step of my pattern before a breakdown comes in, so the impact is much more severe. It's that simple, that easy to do. Now, keep in mind, with any of the songs that I've ever written, one of my biggest pet peeves is repetition. For some reason, I just don't like repeating sections. Whether it's choruses or verses or breakdowns, it doesn't matter. I always like to have the next part that comes up be something new and fresh as you go throughout the song. So for me, that's why this section in particular is that much more interesting. And on a side note, like the nice guy that I am, I went ahead and did a slowed down playthrough of just the guitars at 110 BPM so you could see how the song is played note by note. Alright, now with guitars out of the way, let's take a minute to look at the bass. For my bass guitars, still to this day, I use the Chango Studios plugin. And from there, like the guitars, I add my own personal EQ to dial in the sound that I'm looking for. So, just like the guitars, here's a clip of the bass with no EQ. But here's that same clip with the EQ dialed in to the sound that I was looking for. Like I mentioned before, an EQ really comes down to your personal preference. So try out all different ways, and who knows, you might find a setting that works better for what you're going for. One of the main things about bass is that I always try my best to follow the main guitar without sacrificing too much of the low end. So if some notes can be played on the lower side of the neck, then it's best to try to stick down there to keep your sound sounding as full as possible. Now, relating to the glitch steps from the guitars, I tend to follow them the best that I can within the MIDI of the bass guitar. But there are some situations that I specifically remove the bass in order to emphasize what's going on with the glitching of the guitars. That way, when everything comes back in, it has more of a stronger impact. For example, that right there, I had the bass cut out over the panning, but then come back in with a slide as all the other instruments came back together. It's just the little details that can make the biggest changes in the way something sounds. One of the things I should have mentioned beforehand is that all of the bass guitar in each of these sessions was done by MIDI, meaning it's not live bass guitar. It was all done by going in individually and plugging in each and every note that's played on the guitar, as you can see right here. Alright guys, and with that, we've summed up how I get the guitars and bass sounding the way I do on my sessions. Alright guys, that's a wrap on guitar and bass, so hopefully I'll be seeing you in a couple days for the next session where we cover drums and electronics. But until then, keep practicing and keep safe. Until next time, peace out guys.